All right, let's get into one of the most famous and honestly misunderstood love triangles of all time. We all kind of know the story, right? Jacob works for 7 years to marry the beautiful Rachel, but gets tricked into marrying her older sister, Leah, instead. It's a great story of love and betrayal. But what if I told you that the way we usually hear it completely misses the point? That the real drama is so much deeper and so much more intense.
See, the whole thing kicks off with this one single, really puzzling description of Leah. The Bible sets up this immediate contrast between the two sisters, and it all comes down to this one question. What on earth was actually wrong with Leah's eyes?
So right out of the gate, the text puts them side by side. On the one hand, you have Rachel, who gets this glowing review, beautiful in form and appearance. No ambiguity there. But then you have Leah. All we're told is that her eyes were rakat. The story immediately frames her as the lesser sister, but what that word actually means has been a mystery for, well, centuries.
Now, to really get this story, you have to understand who Jacob is when he shows up. He's not just some young guy looking for love. He is a man on the run. And for him, Rachel represents something way bigger than just a wife.
I mean, think about it. Jacob doesn't just wander into town. He arrives as a fugitive. He literally just deceived his own blind father to steal his brother's blessing and birthright. So he's carrying this huge promise, sure, but he's also looking over his shoulder, completely haunted by his past. When he sees Rachel at that well, he doesn't just see a pretty face. He sees a lifeline. He sees a chance to finally stop running and build a normal, respectable life. And knowing that, it completely reframes those next 7 years. What we often read as this epic romance looks a lot more like a psychological obsession. Jacob basically puts his entire life on layaway for the prize he thinks will fix everything.
And here it is, the line we all know. On the surface, it sounds like one of the most romantic things ever written, right? A love so deep that 7 years of hard labor just fly by in a flash. But if you look a little closer, something much darker is going on.
Yeah, some scholars argue this is actually a really cruel line. The point isn't that the work was easy. The point is that Jacob had completely checked out of his own life. He wasn't really living in the present at all. He was in this state of suspended animation, just waiting. All his hope, all his purpose was projected onto this one future moment when he would finally have Rachel.
And that's the key. Rachel stopped being a person to him. She became an idol. She was the living symbol of the normal future he was desperate for. She was proof that he wasn't that deceitful kid anymore. Every single day of that hard labor was worth it because she was the prize at the end. She wasn't a partner to build a life with, she was his personal salvation project.
And this obsession is precisely what makes the morning after the wedding so absolutely catastrophic for him. This isn't just a simple bait and switch. For Jacob, this is the total and complete collapse of his entire world.
I mean, the irony is just poetic, isn't it? The man whose whole story is defined by him using darkness and disguise to trick his blind father is now himself tricked in the dark, totally blind to who he's with. His greatest sin comes back to haunt him in the most perfect, inescapable way.
And you can see why he was so broken. This was more than just anger, it was an existential crisis. First, his belief that hard work gets you what you want? Gone. His prize was stolen. Second, his belief that deception was something he'd left in the past? Nope. It was now his own fate. And most importantly, his belief that Rachel was his salvation. Well, he woke up to find out his new life was actually starting with Leah.
So, the story is forced to pivot, and we're forced to look at Leah, which brings us back to that central mystery about her eyes. And if we use a few ideas from disability studies, we can finally start to unpack what the text is really getting at.
Okay, let's look at this word again, rakat. It's a super tricky Hebrew word. It could mean something nice like tender or delicate, but it can also mean weak or dull. And since it's immediately followed by this glowing description of Rachel, pretty much everyone agrees the narrator is pointing out some kind of flaw, something that makes her less desirable. Now, to really get the impact of this, we have to borrow an idea from disability studies. There are two ways to think about disability. The old medical model says the problem is just inside a person's body. But the sociocultural model makes a brilliant point. It argues that disability is often created by society itself, by the barriers and negative attitudes we have towards people who are different. So here is the big idea. It actually doesn't matter if Leah had a real diagnosable medical condition.
The narrator's point is that her social disadvantage, the fact that she wasn't seen as beautiful, was so powerful that it functioned as if it were a physical disability. In her world, it limited her, it defined her, and it separated her from everyone else. This connects to a really old idea about beauty. Back then, something was considered deformed or ugly if its outside appearance seemed to contradict its inner purpose. And in that ancient patriarchal world, a woman's main purpose was seen as having children. So Leah's weak or dull appearance was seen as a flaw because it made her seem frail, like she wasn't up to the vital task of motherhood. But, and this is the best part, this is where the story pulls the ultimate Uno reverse card. The narrator spends all this time setting up a world that values people based on appearance and desire, only to have the entire system flipped completely on its head. Check out this incredible irony. Rachel, the beautiful, desirable prize, is barren, which, in her culture, was a recognized and devastating disability. Meanwhile, Leah, the undesirable sister with the weak eyes, she is unbelievably fertile. The woman everyone saw as defective is the one who perfectly fulfills her purpose, while the woman everyone saw as perfect cannot. Just look at how it all plays out. Jacob saw Leah as defective, but the story says God opened her womb, and she becomes the mother of 7 children and is eventually buried with Jacob in the family tomb. He saw Rachel as the ultimate prize, but the story says God closed her womb, and she ends up dying tragically in childbirth after having only 2 sons. The world Jacob thought he understood was not the real world at all. His entire value system gets turned inside out.
And this brings us to such a powerful way of understanding this story. Jacob spent 14 years of his life chasing Rachel, believing she was the prize, the reward for all his work and all his suffering. But he eventually had to learn that she wasn't the prize. She was only the test.
Rachel was the dream. She was the idol, the symbol of the life he was sure he deserved. But she wasn't the one who would actually shape him into the man he needed to become. No, it was Leah, the wife he never wanted, the life he was forced into, that ended up being the source of his true transformation. All the real growth happened on the side of his life he never chose. And that leaves us with a pretty profound question to think about, doesn't it? We all have a Rachel in our lives, some goal, some ideal, some prize that we pour all of our energy into. But maybe this ancient story is trying to tell us something else. It's asking us to wonder, what if our most important growth, our deepest transformations, don't come from the prize we're chasing, but from the test we're given?